Your Excellency, Dr. Hussam Zaman, the President of Education and Training Evaluation Commission, ETEC, Mr. Andreas Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills at the OECD, distinguished speakers, respected attendees, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an honor to welcome you all in today's event titled Launch and Seminar on Monitoring Education, Improving Data Usage, and Integrating Evaluation and Assessment Structures, organized in cooperation with the OECD, yet another step in developing the education and training sector in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Today is the official launch of the project, which aims to support ETEC in selecting appropriate education indicators to meet their monitoring needs, provide recommendations to enhance ETEC's data management capacity, improve the alignment of ETEC's evaluation and assessment instruments, and review ETEC's internal resources and relationships with other government bodies. I'm pleased now to guide you through the program of today. As you can see, we will start with the panel discussion for about 1 hour. We will then break for 15 minutes for prayer, and then we will resume at 12:45 with 3 sessions from OECD, Portugal, Estonia, and ETEC. The sessions include 15 minutes Q&A. The last item in the agenda is a 40 minutes discussion and commentary session run by the OECD. Today, we are using WebEx as a meeting platform. You can participate during the Q&A and the discussion sessions by clicking on the raise hand icon besides your name in the participants list. The language of the event is English, and the sessions will be recorded for our knowledge base. And now we will start the first item in our agenda, a panel discussion between His Excellency Dr. Zaman and Mr. Schleicher for about 1 hour, including the questions and answers. The panel will be moderated by Professor Nayaf Al-Jabri, Director General for Research and Data Management at ETEC. تفضل دكتور نياف.
شكرا دكتور منصور. Your Excellencies, Dr. Hussam Zaman and Mr. Andreas Schleicher, dear prominent speakers and precious participants, it's a unique opportunity for me to welcome you all to such an important and prestigious event, and hope we all enjoy a conversation during sessions and delightfully exchange ideas. As primarily planned, this meeting should have been held physically as normal. However, surprises can be used to forward strongly. I'm so thrilled to introduce 2 renowned names in the sphere of education and training. His Excellency Dr. Hussam Zaman, the President of Education and Training Education Commission, who has extensive executive journey in the education sector, passing by all aspects of quality and excellence and reaching out successfully to high leaderships, leaving remarkable prints in all positions he passed through, bringing all background expertise into currently and timely, well-heard achievements in ETEC. Mr. Andreas Schleicher is the Director of Education and Skills and a Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, abbreviated usually as OECD. He is described as one of the most important men in education worldwide, given his considerable impact on education policy, with over 20 years working with ministers of education and leaders of education around the globe. To name but a few, he is the founder of PISA, the most influential international assessment of student learning and performance of education systems. Before we dive into our panel session, I would like to express my profound gratitude to all those who squeeze their schedules to join us today and register their names as contributors to this national project. Your Excellency, Dr. Hussam, I'll leave the mic to you to greet our partners and speakers who were very responsive to accept our invitation despite of the short note. Dr. Hussam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nayaf. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming and joining us virtually today in this very important event of launching this partnership cooperation between ETIC and OECD education sector. I'm very honored and pleased to welcome our partners headed with Mr. Andreas Schleicher, who is very internationally recognized as scholar and implementer in education reform. We have been getting the honor and pleasure of working in this project. We here in ETIC, we are very proud to be famous of, officially launching and already running projects. So our cooperation between ETIC and OECD is already on the run, and we are very happy with the initial results that we are witnessing from this cooperation. And I really appreciate the efforts and the time and the expertise that have been put and will be put in this great project. So thank you, Mr. Schleicher, and thank you for your team for their dedication and their strong interest in strengthening the mission of ETIC and expanding and improving its exercise and practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Dear audience, this session is a panel discussion. A series of questions, as normal, will be directed to the two panelists, His Excellency Dr. Hussam Zaman and Mr. Andreas Schleicher. However, the last 15 minutes of the session will be dedicated for your questions and comments. You just can go to your name in the list of participants and click on the hand icon to appear as a raising hand. You can also use the chat area to jot down your comments or question, so I can pick up them from there. So please stay with us until the end of the day and make sure that your mics are muted throughout the session. I'll start by you, welcoming you again, Mr. Andreas Schleicher, and will direct the first question to you, if I may. From your perspective, what are the main trends shaping the 21st century education and training?
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. And also, let me I'm so happy to see many friends again this morning, and even if it's only virtually, so that is very good. And not least, I want to congratulate ETIC for the publication of national assessment results. I think that is an amazing accomplishment. I think a very, very strong foundation on which you can build and on which our collaboration between ATEC and the OECD can build, and the defining, developing indicators. So I think it's a great start, and I think this is a very good context for the panel today. Your question is difficult. Obviously, there are major trends shaping education these days. The most prominent one, I think, during the pandemic has become so obvious is digitalization. And I want to look at this in two ways. On the one hand, we need to sort of see how digitalization has changed the delivery of education. Remote learning has become very prominent and so on. But I think the more important question here is how digitalization has changed the nature of the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes and values that will be important for success in the world we live. In the past, you could teach young people something and would be good for their lives, and you could test that knowledge quite easily. Well, in the time of artificial intelligence, the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, are precisely the kind of things that are also easy to digitize, to automate. They're disappearing. And I think for you at ETEC, that is going to be a formidable challenge. The kind of traditional exams and tests that we have, become less and less relevant because they test things that actually, robots are better than at human with. So I think that pushes us to think so much harder. What knowledge, what skills should we test in the future? This idea of digitalization. The other part of this is digitalization has not just, taken away routine cognitive and routine manual skills, but it's also fundamentally changes the way in which we relate to information. When we started with PISA 20 years ago, reading was at the center of the assessment, and reading was so simple to test. It was about, extracting, knowledge from prefabricated text, and when students didn't know the answer to a question, they could look it up in an encyclopedia and you could trust the answer to be true. Today, students look up their information on Google when they have a question and they will get 300,000 answers. And nobody will tell them what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about, extracting knowledge. It's about constructing knowledge. Again, what a challenge for the future of evaluation and assessment. So easy to test the processing of information, so hard to test whether students can navigate ambiguity, manage complexity, think critically, think creatively. And so I think the question of the what is fundamentally, challenged in the field of, in the time of digitalization. And then of course comes the delivery of that, we can make learning so much more interactive, so much more granular, so much more adaptive to the needs of individuals. That's the potential of technology, actually, to be a kind of interface that will help learners to develop more ownership over what they learn, how they learn, when they learn, where they learn. So that's, I think, the digitalization trend. I think the other trend really is the kind of lifelong, life-wide trend in education. Once again, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could learn once for your life. You had the same job, you could be successful in that job. Today, even if you keep your job for long, your job will change fundamentally. You need to continuously learn. You need to continuously unlearn. You need to continuously relearn. And again, that means also that we have to rethink the way in which we evaluate learning. In the past, you get a big degree and you'll be sort of recognized for this throughout your life. Today, how do we recognize the learning that happens at the workplace, in very granular levels? How do we certify lifelong, life-wide learning? Assessment, evaluation, examination is no longer just about very lumpy stages in our lives that then last for our future, but it's about being able to continuously observe how people learn, where people learn, when people learn. So again, a challenge for you, a challenge for all of us, this lifelong, life-wide trend. Let me add at least one more, and that is the globalization trend. Today, we're all connected. Technology likes to connect us with people who think like us, who work like us, who look like us. but the world remains diverse, and the capacity of people to think across the boundaries of subject matter disciplines, to connect the dots where the next innovation is going to come from. The capacity of people to appreciate different ways of thinking, different ways of walking, different cultures becomes so important if, you know, we want to help people to live with themselves, to live with others, to live with the planet. The idea of sustainability is also very, very much part of this globalization agenda. So let me just, stop here. I think these are two fundamental trends. Then you could look at lots of other things, the flow of people around the planet, issues around migration, issues around, social diversity, issues around inclusion. But they have been with us for a long time. I think these trends about digitalization and globalization are the one I think we in evaluation and assessment should take most to heart in these days.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas. So digitalization, lifelong learning, and globalization is the most influential factors of future education. Next question will be for you, Your Excellency, Dr. Hussam Zaman, from your angle as the President of ETEC. What are the major initiatives, national priorities, and challenges facing education and training systems in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Dr. Hussam?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nayaf. I will contextualize what Andreas said and put it in the Saudi context here. We are living in a fastly changing society and in a period of great transformation in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that taking into consideration the transformation of the economy of this kingdom and the new look for the future of its citizen and residents. So I think our big challenge is how to have the education sector contributed to fasten this transformation in the kingdom and to be part of it, not an obstacle against this change, taking into consideration the overall global context that Mr. Schleicher just mentioned about the digitalization, the globalization, and the changing, the rapid nature of change in labor market. So I think it's very important that we develop and change of our goal as we are working toward this fastening this transformation. So talking about the priorities here in ETIC, I think it's about enhancing the quality of our measurements, that our evaluation should trigger education sector to change, to develop, to accommodate to the new changes. We need to be sure that our evaluation, our measurements are to guide and lead the education sector to make this change happen. So I think it's a very challenging situation we are in here in ETIC, that because we are not directly making the change in education, we are not directly putting that into action, but we could, and I think we have been trying to do that so far, to trigger the education sector, to motivate it, to put it in a challenging position, to look into change and to fasten the change. Let me give you an example here about one of these projects, the issue of licensing teachers in Saudi Arabia. I think this is the beginning of professionalizing the teaching profession in the kingdom, not the end. Just having an exam or putting teacher to on testing seats. This is not the end of professionalizing. Actually, this is just beginning to be sure that they are continuously learning, that they updating their knowledge about their subjects, about the pedagogy, and our measurement of that in renewing their licenses should reflect the need to do that. So this is just an example of how our work in ETIC is very important, and also it's very difficult and challenging. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hussam. So the demand on improving quality of education in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is unprecedented at this time, and the ETIC is expected to mediate improving the quality of education through improving assessment tools being used by ETIC. I will move to you again, Mr. Bashar, and would ask you, how do you see the importance of evaluating education and training outcomes and the central role of quality data in monitoring this process?
Oh, I think actually Dr. Hussam has already given a very good answer to that, and I'm not sure I can add very much to this, but why do you need an X-ray? Sometimes you think you're perfectly healthy, everything is fine, everything looks great, and then you go to a doctor, do an X-ray, and then they discover, actually you need to do something. And so I think evaluation can help us to see problems early on before they become too big, so that we cannot solve them anymore. I think evaluation helps us to see that things that are not so immediately visible. Now, I think that's a very, very important function of evaluation, the diagnostic function, the early warning system that we need to. But I think Dr. Hussam has highlighted another area that I also very much agree with, and that is to push the frontiers. Evaluation really is the conscience of an education system. Now, there are many forces pulling in all sorts of directions in every education system. Everybody has their own interests. Everybody has their own agenda, parents included. And evaluation can put, all of that to the test. It can build a conscience of, why are we, learning what we learn, with what success, what are the results from all the things that happen. And again, there are all sorts of, pressures on the education system to deliver good results. But are we really, giving our children, the next generation, the education they deserve, they need? We can only find out through evaluation. There's a third, aspect I would add, and that is, you'll never improve what you cannot see and what you cannot measure. So the process of measurement is very, very important if you want to see change. Measurement is important to help students learn better, to help teachers teach better, to help schools become more effective. And I think all of these functions really are very, very important. You want to know where you want to go in education. You want to know whether you arrived where you think you are. I think all of these functions really require reliable and trustworthy data. And you also sort of highlighted this issue around data. And I think that's also, data is our currency. Whether you can trade your ideas depends on the currency. Whether you can trust, in education depends on the quality of that currency. And that's something I think that data can provide. It provides a reduced view of the reality. Let's be clear about it. That's always going to be the case. The data will never capture every nuance of what we see in education, but it has and needs to capture enough to build trust in our educational institutions, in teachers, in the schools that we have in front of us. So I don't think you see any education system in the world that has, achieved reasonable performance that does not have a very strong culture of evaluation, that doesn't have very strong data systems. No. And I know, some people don't like it. You'll always have lots of, opposition from, sometimes the teaching profession, sometimes policymakers. Data can be a nuisance when you think you've done an amazing reform and suddenly your evaluation system says, well, actually, wait a moment, it's not yet implemented. I think data can always disrupt our thinking. But again, you do not see any systems with quality that have not also developed a robust evidence base with good data and a good evaluation culture. It's as much about, you know, the data and the facts as it is about the culture with which we look at results. No?
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Hussam. Now it's your question, and to tell us about the strategic directions of ITAC in light of Vision 2030 in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. You already mentioned in your previous talk is that the demand is a lot on education in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to meet the expectations of Vision 2030. So tell us please about your future directions of ITAC.
Okay, thank you. Actually, you know, we live under the umbrella of the general direction of Vision 2030 in the kingdom here, and something very important is to make sure that our education institutions and universities are preparing students for the rapid changing of labor market in the future, and also to, in this time of pandemic and isolation in the world, I think it's very important to get back the global citizenship agenda on the table again. So here in ETIC, when we are talking about our role as the evaluation commission, I think it's our future and near future. It's how to get most out of the evaluation tools that we are utilizing in the education sectors. How to make sure that they are aligned together, that the data we getting out of it will inform the reform and the decision making in the education sector, to be sure that this kind of evaluation data we are getting out of the evaluation exercises in the field, that is very informative about the actual practices, that it's updating the decision-making procedures about the changes that are taking place in the field. So translating that into projects, I think it's very important to enhance the quality of our measurement tools and making more digitalized, that it can be used and utilized in different situations. Particularly, this pandemic proved the importance of delivering measurement in different circumstances. Also, it's very important, and this is another project here, plus the digitalization of our evaluation, is the better utilization of the data that we get out of the evaluation, and to translate that into report that easily accessible to policy makers and decision those who are responsible for decision and reforms in education, that they can make the decision more evidence-based and data-driven. So this is basically what I think it's the most important thing we need to get into action very soon in the future. Dr. Nayaf, I think your mic is mute.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Sorry for being muted while speaking. Mr. Schleicher, from your treasured history in the OECD and the history of the OECD in supporting countries, how do you explain the role of OECD in supporting the member countries in building their assessment frameworks?
A good question. Yeah. It's a good question. Actually, I think our collaboration with ETAC is a good example of how we work in the OECD. our basic philosophy in the OECD is, we don't tell countries what they should be doing, but we tell them what everybody else has been doing and with what success. So we are basically the first function that we have, the knowledge broker. It's actually not very easy for countries to see what's happening around the world in the field of education, because everyone uses their own frameworks, everybody uses their own metrics, everybody uses their own ways of thinking. And one of the things the OECD does is to be a knowledge broker, translating different ways of thinking into a common framework so that countries can see what's happening in other systems, what's happening around the world. And that's a very, very important function, to give countries better tools to benefit from the experiences of other countries. Related to this, our, development of common metrics. You mentioned already PISA. It's an obvious example where we have created a kind of, again, a currency, a metric that allows countries to compare the results of their education systems. And again, getting useful feedback on how well they are doing in light of what other countries are achieving, helping countries look upwards. So I think the comparative perspective, every year we have our own education indicators report, education at a glance. And once again, its tool is mainly to sort of create a kind of common way of looking at education that countries can use to compare and contrast. These are the obvious functions of the OECD in helping countries, but let me add a couple of other ones that may not be so immediately obvious, but I think they are very important. The third is really the role of a pathfinder. It is often very difficult for countries in a national context to look far out into the future. There are many forces. You have a great vision, 2030. But there are many forces in our societies that protect the status quo, that help us to think in, our very well established ways of thinking. And I do think that the OECD or international collaboration can help us think in longer terms beyond the kind of current frameworks. I know that from my own experience in PISA, we have been able to assess, things, knowledge and skills among students that no country would be able to assess on a national level, simply because some of those topics are too remote from current curricula, too remote from the current functioning of the education system. You couldn't justify, having your assessment so different from the instructional context. But when you do that internationally, you suddenly, you fly 30,000 feet high and you see a different world, and you can actually look much further. So I think this pathfinder function is also very important. The same is true on the methodological side. We've been able, by pooling the expertise from countries to get the best, knowledge from around the world, we have been able to develop methodologies that are far beyond what, countries can do at the national level. I think that's also a very important kind of where the pooled expertise together, we are always stronger than each of us is alone. And I think by having a mechanism to pool that expertise in a systematic manner, we can work. And Dr. Nayaf, you have been a part of our ways of working, attending, our committee meetings. It's a good illustration. It's not really the OECD that is at the helm of this. It's the countries that sit on the boards and the working groups, on the technical expert kind of groups, and they together work on those kinds of solutions. Sharing their ideas, sharing their expertise is very important. The last part, that I add is one that is international collaboration can protect us from great inflation. That's one of the biggest threats that you see in national examination. Most education systems get better and better marks over time. They look better and better. But actually, when you do international comparison, sometimes you see that's not really true. A famous example is the United Kingdom. It saw, better and better results on the GCSEs. Every year, the country performed better. But on PISA, the results stayed almost exactly the same, year after year, every 3 years after 3 years. So suddenly, policymakers raised, not our education is not improving, but we are making our ways of measuring easier and easier. So they actually took, a few years ago, the courage, reform the GCSE in order to become more objective, more focused, more comparable, and so aligning their standards. And that's also, a very important function to protect against, external pressures on an exam system by providing an external anchor. So these are just, a few areas where I think really international collaboration, the role of the OECD has become really quite important. It's really about a framework for international collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Schleicher. Participants, I thank you for being quiet, but we'll encourage you to write down your questions using the chat area if you would like. Dr. Hussam, considering all mentioned ambitions, what are what you expecting as an outcomes of this collaboration with the OECD?
Okay, thank you.
Sam?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nayaf. Just continuing with what we started with, that OECD is a platform where international experiences and lessons could be shared. So, and here I think with our cooperation with OECD, what we are looking for is to get some international lessons and about how to do our job better, starting from the frameworks, from the methodology sector. As you know, Dr. Nayaf and the audiences and attendees here, ETIC is a collection of different centers, from Qiyas, the measurement, to school evaluation, to university accreditation, to accreditation of training. So we need to consolidate and align our evaluation framework as we align them in structures and centers to be more integrative and informative to each other. From that, we want to develop and strengthen and expand and digitalize these instruments that we use based on this framework, evaluation framework. Then we are talking about the improving the internal capacity of ETIC in data management and utilization. That will lead to well-selected set of indicators on identified strategy of the kingdom in education that will inform the decision-making about the quality of education and the quality of changing the education sector towards the kingdom priorities in Vision 2030. So I see our collaboration between ETIC and OECD in all these steps, from the framework to the measurement tools, to the utilization of data, and then to the formation of the indicators that will tell the policymakers clearly and loudly also sometimes what is the status of the education sector in the kingdom and how it has been responsive to the changes and transformation in the whole sector altogether. In light of the international experiences and of the best practices, and sometimes also the bad practices around the world, as Mr. Schleicher mentioned in some of his speeches, that we learn from good practices and also from bad practices that it's not working. So I think we are looking forward with our cooperation with OECD to inform our everyday exercise in all these levels, frameworks, measurement, data utilization, and reports and indicators writing and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go back to you, Mr. Schleicher, for the last question, and from your international experience and from an international episode as a president of the OECD, can you exhibit, please, the importance of cooperation between national entities in each country in building well-aligned monitoring frameworks?
Yeah, interesting. You know, I think we would not ask ourselves that question in other fields. This is something education has often still a very hard time with. You know, if you look around these days, the researchers who have developed the vaccine against the pandemic, they speak a common language. They share a common set of methodological tools. You know, whether you work in Europe, whether you work in the United States, in Russia, in China, you know, they follow the same kind of patterns. They have trusted methods which they use, and they get results which people trusted. In a very short time, in 10 months, you know, people have put the world's best expertise together and built, you know, multiple vaccines that work. We should ask ourselves, you know, in education, how much have we achieved in international collaboration? And it's a really difficult field. It's just emerging. You know, I was part of the education ministerial, which the G20 ministerial, which Minister Hamad hosted, and you could really see also there how, you know, difficult the different traditions and cultures of education still are to establish common ground. You know, your country actually, I think, made very, very good progress in the field. It was only the second time education ministers met in the G20, and they made good progress. But it's still something I think we need to become much, much better with. It's not meaning that, you know, everybody should have the same monitoring framework, but we should have frameworks that can talk to each other. We should be able to interpret our results in light of what is achieved elsewhere. And I think that is something that is gradually emerging, but I think there's a lot more that we can do in this field to make sure that we bring the best minds from around the world together. Now, we live in a world, we have only one planet. You know, the environmental challenge that we have is common. Technology is global. Now, I think many of the environmental factors, challenges face us, but our methods of seeing, you know, how we progress are still very different. We have, you know, Google Translate can help you, you know, interpret your language, but we don't have yet the kind of tools to do that in the education field. It doesn't mean, you know, that we want to have the same standards everywhere, but we want our standards to be able to be articulated, and that's something I think education really, I think, has a long way to go to reach standards that we take for granted in field like science. And that's also one of the reasons why evaluation often still remains a contested field. You know, I think people still, you know, have questions. Teachers have questions about evaluation. You know, is it fair? Is it appropriate? Is it reliable? Parents often need better, you know, orientation. I think we need to really, I think, accelerate this process of international collaboration to ensure that we give, you know, students really good feedback to learn better, teachers really good instruments to teach better, and schools to become a lot more effective.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Dr. Hussam, last question. Along the same perspective, in Saudi Arabia, how do you envision the cooperation between the involved parties in building national monitoring frameworks of education and training system?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Niyaf. As I said, we need to learn from the international experiences about best practices, bad practices, what has been working, what has not been working very well. And I think something that we have been learned, you know, from our experiences and also from international practices and from different countries, that education is not just a matter of one ministry or just of one agency or institutions. It's a matter of cooperation between different ministries, different bodies, that they have to work together, you know, towards achieving the goals that they are that they already agreed on setting as in their plans. And this is, I think, that here it comes that our participation in the human development human resources development programs under the Vision 2030, and I think Mr. Schleicher is already a senior consultant of that program. In that program, we work with Ministry of Education, with VisiTV, and with the Ministry of Commerce, with the Ministry of Communications, also with Sadaya and all other parties that are, connected together, collectively working towards, changing and transforming the education sector in Saudi Arabia. Our part in ETIC is to be sure that our evaluation is taking one step forward that will guide and lead the change in the education. So I think it's when it comes to, for example, to the framework or the methodology of evaluation, I think the transformation of our measurement and test that focus more into the implementation of what students have learned rather than just what they have memorized is something to trigger and change the education sector to focus on application and implementation of theories and concepts. When, for example, our accreditation standards focus more on how the universities and colleges give more attention to measurement of the quality of their outcomes and put more weight into this kind of indicators and criteria of the accreditation, that will lead and guide universities to focus more on assessment to enhance the quality of the assessment and measurement, to be sure that they review more frequently the intended learning outcomes to match the changes in the labor market. So I think we need, and we have been actually working closely with our colleagues in different sectors, in different institutions, different agencies in the kingdom here, to be sure that that we communicate what have been changing and developing in our field of evaluation, that it will inform the actual practices and educational exercises in the field. I hope that I answered your question, Dr. Nayaf, in a way that is should be.
Sure,
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Hussam. It's time now for the questions to be received from our precious audience. Dr. Abdullah Qati, would you like to just jump in?
Thank you, Dr. Nayaf. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Mr. Andreas. We are happy to have all of you with us this morning. I just, based on the, questions and answers that have been, raised and the comments of our Excellency Dr. Hussam, we'd like to strengthen our relation with the OECD in the, implementation part. We have national exams that cover some of the areas that PISA has covered. So we really would like to, have some kind of ability to link our results to the PISA. So is there a way that we could share some linking tools that could make the results more beneficial for us and could predict our, performance of our kids ahead of time before the PISA, they take the PISA? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I think the question is for you, Mr. Schleicher.
Yeah, actually, there are many countries that have done that already. Some do this by including some of the PISA items in the national test. And that's if you have a similar kind of target population, 15-year-old, or in your case, 10th grade, that's a sensible way of doing. You can include some of the PISA tasks in the national tests, and then you can anchor your national scales against the PISA scales. Now, there are several examples of countries that have done that. That's the most robust and reliable way, because you can really be sure to be metrically comparing results. There are also some efforts to align results on, complete scale scores. That is less robust but easier to do, because you don't need the same kind of tasks. Now, you just do a small anchoring study. But yes, I think it's an interesting kind of it's an interesting task. There are two requirements for this really only. One is you need, of course, to have a test at a similar kind of age level in the country, roughly. And that's the first requirement. And the second requirement is that your kind of frameworks need to be reasonably compatible. Now, PISA is a competency-based assessment. So if your national assessment, and I know you're working on this, also includes competency-based components, then it's meaningful to make those comparisons. But if you have a national assessment that is entirely, knowledge focused, it would be, even if you can, link the scores, you wouldn't be able to interpret those results. So yes, I think that's something that can be done. There are other ways of doing this as well. For example, the Russian Federation is now administering a PISA light test every year. It's basically to select a small set of schools where they actually, and using the PISA for Schools assessment to basically see how the country is progressing against PISA, because they have a performance target to be among the top 10 in, I don't know, in I think 2026 or so. And so they use that methodology, but that's a lot more expensive, because then you need to draw your own sample. You need to have additional kind of measurement points. The easiest really is to integrate some assessment material from PISA in your assessment, or to integrate national assessment material into the PISA test design. Australia has done that. That's also a way, but then you couldn't do it more frequently than PISA. So the short answer is yes. We will be happy to work with you on those methodologies if you like to pursue that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schleicher. I think if you would extend your answer for 1 minute more, because Professor Abdullah Sa'dawi is asking about the trend in assessing skills, especially in large scale assessment, as if there is really challenge in assessing skills in written test.
Yeah, first of all, one of the things we are working on is to capture a wider range of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that are important. At this moment, we are, piloting the assessment of creative thinking skills in PISA, something that many educators believe to be one of the key domains for success in tomorrow's world. Easy to say, easy to talk about creativity, very hard to build metrics around this, but PISA will have that in this next assessment. One aspect of creativity, creative thinking. We're also working on competencies in the digital world, learning in the digital world. We're less interested about the technological aspect, because that will change very rapidly. We are more interested in the cognitive, social, and emotional aspects that you need to be successful in the digital world. Coping with change, being resilient, being adaptive, being able to navigate ambiguity, being able to manage complexity, deal with the many contradictions that you see in the digital world. So those kinds of cognitive, social, emotional aspects are ones, and we hope to have that ready for 2025. That's a long way out, but that's sort of in the pipeline. And then in parallel to this, we devote a lot of effort currently at the OECD to measuring character, the social and emotional kind of aspects that are very important for people's lives, that are hard to capture in traditional forms of assessment, but increasingly employers realize how important they are, entrepreneurship, empathy, courage, leadership. Those are very, very important human capabilities. And so we are working on building assessments around those. And actually, we will very soon, in June, publish our first report with first results from 11 countries. And that will be a starting point to explore that further.
Thank you, Mr. Schleicher. You are important, very important today. So we will use this opportunity very well with you. And here is a question from Dr. Ghada Al-Khadim. If you would like to ask it to you, Mr. Schleicher. Dr. Ghada, assuming that evaluation and assessment is important to improve the quality of education, but there must be a ceiling on the assessment and evaluation. So what sort of supplementary materials or supplementary efforts need to be made by ETEC to raise the ceiling of influence of assessment and measurement and evaluation?
Yeah, I think there are still many methodological ceilings. Not everything that is important in education can be easily captured, quantified, compared. Now, that's an obvious kind of methodological ceiling, but we can raise that ceiling. I think that's so important that we should not accept the current ceiling as, granted. We should continue to work on that ceiling. So I think that, and that's, for example, the examples I just gave you before are ones where we are working on extending that ceiling. The other ceiling comes from the capacity of education systems to absorb good information and translate it into better outcomes and better policies. And I think that's an area where I can see a very important role for ETEC in the future, helping teachers to translate the results from teacher-based assessment into, better teaching practices, better, instructional practices, helping policymakers to interpret the findings from comparative assessment to develop, better school-based policies and so on. So I think we often forget that, and as methodologists, we think when we have the numbers, we have the final product. But really, that product is usually just a starting point for actually translating data, improvement. And often, that connection is not made in many countries. We have actually a lot of data that is not feeding into better policies, better practices. And that is, I think, something, at ETEC, I think you could make a tremendous contribution by building a better, evidence-based culture across the country and helping people to use data for designing better policies, better practices. It's also about changing mindsets. I think at the policy level, that's one thing. At the level of practitioners, that's quite another. For many educators, education is more an art than a science. And they often, question the value of evidence and data and the relevance of this for their daily practice. They say, well, my students are very different from the average student, and every student has its own characteristics. I need to respond to this. And comparative data is so crude for that kind of purposes. And I don't think that education should be less of an art in the future, but it should become more of a science. If teachers do not have common tools, common standards, common ways of sharing their practice, they will all work in isolation behind four walls of a classroom. It's only by helping teachers to look outwards to the next teacher, to learn from and with other teachers, and sometimes that's qualitative in nature, observing other teachers' classrooms, building collaborative frameworks for that. I think you could play a very, very important role in raising professionalism in the teaching profession by creating a stronger collaborative culture among teachers. And ultimately, that is your best bet to translate, evidence into better outcomes.
Time is up. And Your Excellency, Dr. Hussam, if you would like to make any final comment.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I want to welcome again Mr. Schleicher and his team from OECD, and thank them all for their good faith in ethics and their great support for our mission here in the kingdom. I think actually the work of Mr. Schleicher and his team is very inspiring for us, and also we really appreciate their willingness to continuing with ethics, supporting, providing, sharing experiences, and also looking and evaluating our product. So thank you very much, Mr. Schleicher. Thank you from our hearts, and we really looking forward to welcome you again back in Saudi Arabia physically in our headquarters in Riyadh very soon, after inshallah this pandemic just vanished. Hopefully every time we just thought that it's we are very soon from the end. It seems that we need an extra couple of months or 3. So hopefully this is the last time we just experiencing, you know, another fear of lockdown or something like that. But looking forward to see you very soon. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So do I. I very much look forward to our continued collaboration. I've learned a lot from you, and I think together we can actually do a lot for education, also on a global scale. And as you say, you know, we should try to do that physically as soon as we can. But as humans, we have to remain as creative as the viruses, you know.
And I thank you very much, Your Excellency Dr. Hussam and Mr. Andreas Schleicher. Thank you very much. It's been very informative, and you've been very great panelists. Please, our audience, our valuable audience, there are remaining 3 sessions, very important, or 4 sessions, very important, especially the last one of them, because we'll have a national dialogue on the national monitoring framework of education and training in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much again, and see you in 15-minute time.